Number 15. Teteteke Kutsi. It had been nearly 2 years since Christmas Ketwin's brother, Teteteke Kutsi, had vanished from his hospital bed, only to be found dead in the ceiling of Stellenbosch Hospital nearly 2 weeks later. The discovery had been shocking enough, but the silence that followed was even more unbearable. The memory of that day haunted Christmas and South Africa as a whole. The 61-year-old Teteteke had been admitted for what should have been a routine abdominal surgery on October 5, 2017. The hospital had assured the family that everything would go smoothly and that Teteteke would be back on his feet in no time. But nearly as soon as he was admitted, Teteteke disappeared. Christmas remembered the frantic calls, the desperate visits to the hospital, the pleas for information. But no one had answers. The hospital staff seemed as confused as the family. Teteteke had been there one moment, and the next, he was gone. The last anyone saw of him was when a nurse had left the room to fetch clean linen. When she returned, his bed was empty. 13 days later, construction workers made a grisly discovery in an isolated section of the hospital. Teteteke's body was found mysteriously wedged in the ceiling, hidden from sight. The news shattered the family. How had he ended up there? And why? These were the questions that kept Teteteke's loved ones awake at night. The authorities had been quick to offer a conclusion. Natural causes, they claimed. Teteteke had supposedly died of natural causes, and that was that. But if that was the case, how did he end up in the ceiling? Christmas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. How could his brother have died naturally in such a bizarre location? And why had the hospital not informed the family of his disappearance until it was too late? The silence from the hospital and the police was infuriating. The family had been promised answers, but all they received were empty words and vague reassurances. Even the officer assigned to the case seemed to have lost interest, brushing off the family's concerns. Still, the family tried to find closure. They wanted to understand what had happened to Teteteke, but the more they searched, the less they seemed to find. They had even considered legal action against the hospital, a last-ditch effort to force some accountability. But the process was slow and filled with obstacles. And then there was the hospital's medical manager, Dr. Richard Davids, who insisted that the family had been kept informed. But according to Christmas, the only communication they'd had with the hospital was after the Cape Times reported on the incident. The hospital had been more concerned with covering their tracks than with providing the family with the answers they were after. Somewhere, buried beneath the lies and indifference, lies the truth. And despite Christmas's determination to find it, it may be an unsolved mystery for the ages. Number 14. Eriksson Sisters. It was a May afternoon in 2008 when a pair of identical twins, Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, boarded a coach bound for London. They were two unassuming women in their early 40s, originally from Sweden, but now living separate lives. Sabina in Ireland with her partner and children, Ursula in the United States. The journey began normally, but as the miles rolled by, something shifted. By the time they reached Kiel services on the M6, the twins' behavior had grown bizarre. Passengers and staff noticed their erratic actions, nervous glances, whispered conversations, and sudden movements that seemed concerning. The driver called the police during a stop at a service station and declined to allow them back on board. As dusk fell, the twins found themselves on the motorway's central reservation. After several motorists noticed the women and alerted authorities, traffic officers approached them to offer assistance. Traffic whizzed by, but the sisters seemed oblivious to the danger. Then, without warning, they darted into oncoming traffic. Ursula was struck first, her body crumpling under the weight of a lorry. Sabina followed, colliding with a Volkswagen Polo. Miraculously, both survived, but their ordeal was far from over. Emergency services scrambled to the scene, trying to make sense of the chaos. Ursula, with her legs shattered, screamed and fought against those trying to help her, spitting and scratching wildly. Meanwhile, Sabina, despite her injuries, lashed out at an officer before once again running into the path of oncoming vehicles. The motorway was shut down, a scene of utter chaos as the twins were finally restrained and taken to the hospital. Mere hours later, Sabina was discharged. The doctors felt there was no reason to keep her, and so she was free to go. She wandered the streets of Stoke-on-Trent, seemingly disoriented but determined to find her sister. By evening, she encountered two men walking their dog, Glenn Hollinshead, a kind-hearted former paramedic, and his friend, Peter Malloy. Seeing the woman in such a state, Glenn offered her a place to stay for the night, unaware of the danger he was inviting into his home. As the night wore on, Sabina's behavior grew more erratic. Muttering and paranoid, she constantly checked the windows. Peter left, uneasy but not suspecting the horror that was to come. The next morning, in a sudden fit of violence, Sabina grabbed a kitchen knife and Glenn 4 times. Staggering outside, he managed to tell a neighbor before collapsing. He was dead before help could arrive. Sabina fled the scene, her hands still covered in Glenn's blood. She began hitting herself with a hammer she had stolen. A passing motorist tried to intervene, but she struck him with a tile she had hidden in her pocket. The pursuit ended when Sabina leapt from a 40-foot bridge onto the A50, breaking both ankles but miraculously surviving the fall. She was finally apprehended, charged with murder, and in September 2009, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility. The court acknowledged her mental illness, a rare and tragic case of shared psychosis, where the delusions of one twin fueled the other. Sabina was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a sentence that many felt was far too lenient for the life lost. Ursula eventually recovered and returned to her life in the US, reporting no further psychosis. Number 13. Konstantinos Philippidis. Konstantinos Philippidis, known to friends as Danny, had always been a careful man. A firefighter by trade, he was used to danger but knew how to navigate it. So, when he and his colleagues set out for a skiing trip on the slopes of Whiteface Mountain in Lake Placid, New York, no one expected anything bad to unfold. But on February 2nd, 2018, amidst the snowy landscape, something inexplicable happened. Danny vanished. One moment he was heading to his car to grab his phone, and the next, he was gone. His friends waited, trying to spot him on the mountain, but Danny never returned. The search that followed was frantic and thorough, but days passed with no sign of him. They assumed the worst had happened. Then, 6 days later, on the other side of the country, in Sacramento, California, Danny reappeared. He was still clad in his ski gear, disoriented, and with no memory of how he had crossed the country. His mind was a blank space where memories should have been. He couldn't recall the journey, the people he had encountered, or even how he had ended up so far from where he had last been conscious. Back in Toronto, where Danny worked as a captain with Toronto Fire Services, doctors scrambled to piece together the fragments of his memory. They concluded he had likely suffered a head injury severe enough to knock him unconscious and leave him with amnesia. But the exact details of what had happened in those lost days were missing. Danny tried to recount his experience to a reporter, Michelle McQuigga, the only journalist granted access to his story. He remembered being cold and sore when he woke up, likely after falling on the slopes. He vaguely recalled flagging down a truck, but everything after that was a blur. The next thing he knew, he was in Utah, more than 3,000 kilometers from where he had started. When he was dropped off in Sacramento, He had no identification and only a single credit card. It took him an entire day to remember his wife's phone number. When he finally called, it wasn't her who answered, but the wife of one of his friends. "Everyone is looking for you," she said. The realization of how far he was from home and how long he had been missing hit him hard. As Danny returned to Toronto, his miraculous cross-country journey was all anyone could talk about. Doctors speculated about what might have caused his memory lapse. Some believed it was a classic case of concussion-induced amnesia, with memories wiped clean by a jolt to the brain. Others considered a dissociative fugue state, where the mind, overwhelmed by trauma or stress, simply shuts down, leaving the person with swaths of forgotten time. Even now, Danny's memories of those 6 lost days remain fragmented. The full story of what happened to him may never be known. The mysterious truck driver who might know more was never found. All Danny has are islands of memory of a journey he never intended to take. Number 12. Skye Budnick. Skye Lynn Budnick had always been a dreamer. Her fascination with Japanese culture had blossomed during her studies at Central Connecticut State University. She was drawn to a land she had never seen, and for 3 years immersed herself in its language and traditions. But when 2 opportunities to study abroad slipped through her fingers, Skye took matters into her own hands. Without a word to anyone, she booked a one-way ticket to Japan, a decision that would soon become an unsolved mystery. It was March 31st, 2008, when Skye was last seen on American soil. She left everything behind: her car, her friends, her family, taking only her computer, a Nintendo DS, and her debit card. She vanished from the lives of those who loved her most. The days following Skye's disappearance were a blur. Her sister, Megan LeBron, remembered the eerie calm that preceded the storm. Skye had been showing signs of clinical depression, which Megan now feared had driven her sister to depart so abruptly. But there was something more unsettling, a feeling that Skye hadn't gone alone. In the small town of Noborobetsu, on the southern tip of Hokkaido, Japan, Skye's trail went cold at an inn where she'd stayed. Her family assumed she would not have made such a significant decision to depart on her own. Someone must have helped her, but who? And why? The family replayed the moments before Skye's departure over and over, searching for the signs they had missed, but nothing came to light, and roadblocks complicated the case significantly. Language barriers, legal complexities, and the frustrating lack of access to Japanese police records made searching for Skye more difficult. Then, something turned up. Years later, Megan discovered that the familial DNA sample they had submitted in 2008 had never reached Japan. It had been lost in the labyrinth of international bureaucracy. But now, with new technologies and the help of Interpol, the Budnicks had a chance to submit a new sample to finally bring Skye home, if only in the form of receiving some answers and closure. Megan set up a GoFundMe page. The goal was daunting: $100,000 to cover the cost of another trip to Japan, this time with the hope that DNA might unlock the case's secrets. But the support they had received from strangers gave her strength. Skye's family felt something they hadn't allowed themselves to feel in years: hope. After 16 years, this was the most actionable step they could take in a case that had haunted them day and night. Their last chance. As of this posting, the results have yet to determine any new leads. But Megan continues to raise awareness through social media like TikTok, and the family's hope remains. Number 11. Robert Wone. On August 2, 2006, in Washington, D.C., Robert Wone's life came to a sudden and brutal end. A respected lawyer and a man known for his kindness and diligence, Robert was spending the night at a friend's house after a late day at work. But by the next morning, he would be the center of an unsolved mystery. Robert arrived at the row house on Swan Street around 10:30 p.m., seeking rest after a long commute. His friends, Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward, were no strangers. Robert had known Joseph since their college days, and the three men lived together in a unique arrangement that they called their family. It was meant to be a fun night with friends, but the house was about to become a crime scene. Shortly after Robert's arrival, he took a shower and prepared for bed. The house settled into a deceptive calm, but a neighbor would later report hearing a desperate scream from the house between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. The three men inside claimed they heard nothing and noticed nothing until it was too late. At 11:49 p.m., a frantic call was made to 911. Victor Zaborski told the operator, "We had someone in our house evidently, and they somebody." Paramedics arrived within minutes, finding Robert Wone lying motionless on the pull-out couch in the guest room. He had been 3 times in the chest and abdomen, the wounds precise and deep. Yet something about the scene was disturbingly off. There was hardly any blood. The bed beneath Robert was nearly undisturbed, as though he had been carefully placed there after the fact. The friends claimed an intruder had broken in and committed the crime, but investigators were skeptical. The house showed no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen, not even Robert's wallet, watch, or phone, which lay untouched nearby. The autopsy revealed something else. Robert had been drugged, possibly sedated into unconsciousness, before his death. There were no defensive wounds on his body, suggesting he hadn't fought back, likely because he couldn't. Needle marks were found on his neck, adding to the growing suspicion that this murder was far from a random act of violence. The three men's stories remained consistent, yet the police felt something was amiss. The supposed murder weapon, a knife found at the scene, didn't quite match the wounds on Robert's body, and another knife from Dylan Ward's room was missing. Investigators believed the crime scene had been cleaned and staged, and not much incriminating evidence had been left behind. Despite their doubts, the police couldn't pin the murder on anyone. The roommates were charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy, accused of tampering with evidence and lying to authorities. But in 2008, a judge acquitted them, citing a lack of evidence to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Robert Wone's death remains an unsolved mystery. His killer walks free. The friends who swore they knew nothing may know something, but for now, the final hours of Robert Wone's life are left in darkness. Number 10. Larry Bader. During what should have been a routine fishing trip on Lake Erie, Lawrence Joseph Bader disappeared without a trace. That day in 1957 had started like any other, but it had ended in a way that no one could have anticipated. Larry had told his wife Mary Lou that he was going to Cleveland for business and might go fishing afterward. She had asked him to come straight home instead, but he had only smiled and said, "Maybe I will, and maybe I won't." Those words replayed in her mind when he didn't return, and continued to replay weeks later when there was still no sign of him. Although he remained missing, his empty boat was found the morning after he didn't return, its propeller damaged and one oar missing. As one might with such evidence, Mary Lou feared the worst. The Coast Guard searched for months, but they found no sign of Larry. Only the cold, merciless lake that wasn't giving anything up. The official word was that Larry had likely drowned in the storm that had swept through the area that day. He was declared dead in 1960, and Mary Lou was left to pick up the pieces. 4 months pregnant when he went missing, she was forced to raise their 4 children on her own. He had recently increased his life insurance clause to include accidental death, and the payout helped, but it didn't ease the ache of loss. And then, in 1965, A call came that again upended her world as she knew it. Mary Lou could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her brother-in-law was on the line, and he was telling her that Larry had been found alive. But there was more. The man claiming to be Larry Bader was living in Omaha, Nebraska, under the name John Fritz Johnson. He was a TV personality, an archery enthusiast, and a local celebrity with a penchant for the dramatic. But most shocking of all was that he claimed to have no memory of ever being Lawrence Joseph Bader. Mary Lou boarded the plane to Omaha, her mind racing. Was this really her Larry? How could he not remember her, their children, their life together? And if it wasn't Larry, who was this man who looked so much like him? When she arrived, the man she found was a stranger in every way except his face. He had the same eyes, the same build, the same smile, but the person inside was someone else entirely. He called himself Fritz, and he laughed at the idea that he might be Larry Bader. Yet when they took his fingerprints, they were a match with those in Larry's military records. Fritz Johnson was, in fact, Lawrence Joseph Bader. The doctors were baffled. Was this a case of amnesia brought on by some trauma or illness? Or had Larry Bader, for reasons known only to him, decided to abandon his old life and create a new one? Fritz's sudden blindness in one eye from a malignant tumor compounded the mystery, as his lawyer suggested it could have caused a psychological break and possibly even amnesia. As the medical team probed deeper, they found no evidence of deceit, yet the questions remained. Fritz himself was bewildered, claiming that his memories as Fritz were as real to him as any life he might have lived before. But what of Mary Lou and the children he had left behind? What of the debts he had accrued, the insurance money paid out on his supposed death? He hadn't paid income tax in 5 years. Was he living a double life in order to flee the mounting financial pressure? The truth died with him in 1966, when the tumor claimed his life. Even in his final moments, he insisted he was Fritz Johnson. Mary Lou never received the answers she sought, and the man she had once loved remained as lost as the day he disappeared on Lake Erie. Number 9. Diana Robertson and Mike Reamer. A small search party combed through the dense woods near Mineral, Washington. It had been over 25 years since anyone had last seen Michael Reamer or his girlfriend, Diana Robertson, alive. The case was once a headline grabber, but had long since gone cold, now considered an unsolved mystery. But a new discovery brought investigators closer than ever to a solution. Diana's body had been found shortly after the disappearance, but Michael's remains were nowhere to be found. In 2011, a hiker stumbled upon a partial human skull, tucked in the underbrush, less than a mile from where Diana's body had been found years before. The skull was quickly sent for analysis, and the results confirmed what many had feared. It belonged to Michael Reamer, the man who had vanished without a trace alongside Diana. As news of the discovery spread, it reignited the haunting questions that had plagued the community for decades. What had really happened on that cold December day in 1985, when Michael and Diana set out on what was supposed to be a routine trapping trip with their daughter Crystal? The 2-year-old daughter had been found wandering alone later that day in a Kmart parking lot. But there had been no sign of the girl's parents until Diana's body was discovered after 2 months, half buried in the snow, and her body told a grim story. With a tube sock wrapped around her neck, she had multiple stab wounds, a similar fate to that of another couple found murdered in the woods just months earlier. But Michael had yet to be found, until now. The discovery of his skull, however, didn't answer much. Instead, more questions followed. How long had he been dead? And more importantly, how had he died? The only answer the skull offered was that Michael had also met a end. Back in 1986, when Diana's body had first been found, Michael had been considered a person of interest in her murder. There had been a history of domestic violence and tension between the couple. In fact, a few months before Diana disappeared, she had filed a restraining order against Michael, which she later dropped. Some speculated that he had killed her in a fit of rage before disappearing into the wilderness. Others believed that he had been a victim too, perhaps caught in the crossfire of some unknown danger lurking in those woods. Now, with the discovery of his remains, the theories were once again up in the air. Detectives were re-examining the evidence in the case, looking for connections to other unsolved murders in the area, including the brutal slayings of Ruth Cooper and Stephen Harkins, whose deaths bore eerie similarities to Diana's, down to a tube sock found tied around Ruth's neck with a knot that mirrored the one found on Diana. As the investigation resumed, the Woods continued to guard the truth, as they had for more than 2 decades. The skull was a clue, but it was far from the whole story. The whole story of what happened to Michael Reamer and Diana Robertson remained, and continues to remain, just out of reach. Number 8. Alonzo Brooks. In the small town of Lacine, Kansas, the FBI launched a campaign to find answers to a haunting mystery that had stumped them for nearly 2 decades: the death of Alonzo Brooks, a young black man whose life had ended far too soon under suspicious and unsettling circumstances. It was the spring of 2004 when 23-year-old Alonzo Brooks went to a party at a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of Lacine. The party was supposed to be a night of fun with some friends, but it was where Alonzo would meet his end. He was one of only 3 black men in a crowd of over 100, and allegedly racial slurs were uttered towards him at the party. When his friends left the party, Alonzo was accidentally left behind, stranded without a ride. The hours passed, and when Alonzo didn't return home the next morning, his family's concern turned to panic. They reached out to the Lynn County Sheriff's Office, and a search was launched. But despite their efforts, there was no trace of Alonzo. Then, the month after he'd gone missing, Alonzo's family and friends decided to take matters into their own hands by organizing their own search, scouring the area around the farmhouse. It took them under an hour to find his body, partially concealed on top of some brush in Middle Creek, just a short distance from where the party had been held. The discovery was a devastating blow, but it brought no real closure. The coroner couldn't determine how Alonzo had died, but for those who knew and loved Alonzo, the idea that his death was a tragic accident never sat right. There were too many questions and inconsistencies. The case remained in the shadows until 2019, when the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas reopened it, determined to uncover the truth. Alonzo's body was exhumed and sent to Dover Air Force Base, where an Armed Forces medical examiner conducted a thorough examination. The conclusion was chilling. Alonzo Brooks had been murdered. His death was no accident. It was a homicide, and the family's suspicions of foul play were confirmed. However, nothing pointed them to any particular suspect. Now, with the passage of time, the FBI has renewed its call for justice. Billboards have sprung up across the greater Kansas City area, offering a $100,000 reward for any information. But so far, nothing has come of their search for the truth. At least, for now. Number 7. Alastair Wilson. On the evening of November 28, 2004, in the quiet town of Nairn, Scotland, Alastair Wilson, a devoted husband and father of 2, was preparing to settle in for the night with his wife, Veronica, and their young sons. The children were freshly bathed, and the bedtime routine was in full swing. But this routine was disrupted by a knock at the door that would change their lives forever. Alastair answered the door, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. Instead, he was met by a stranger who asked for him by name and then handed him a blue envelope with the name Paul scrawled across it. Confused, Alastair stepped back inside to show the envelope to Veronica. Together, they found it to be empty. What did it mean? Who was Paul? There was no time to ponder these questions, as Alastair returned to the front door where the stranger awaited. Without warning, a gunshot rang out, followed by two more, and Alastair Wilson collapsed, mortally wounded. Veronica rushed to his side, but it was too late. Alastair was taken to the hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries, leaving behind a heartbroken family and a mystery that would torment the town of Nairn for years to come. Despite extensive investigations, cold case reviews, and thousands of interviews, no one has been charged with the murder of Alastair Wilson. The case remains unsolved nearly 2 decades later. Though the police investigation initially seemed promising, it has yielded no answers, leaving the Wilson family in a state of perpetual grief and frustration. This year, in June, there was a glimmer of hope when it emerged that a potential suspect had been jailed for an unrelated offense. But that hope quickly dimmed as new evidence arose that appeared to clear this suspect of the murder. In their desperation for answers, Alastair's family filed a formal complaint about the handling of the police investigation. The Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, PIRC, confirmed that an application for a complaint handling review had been received and was under assessment. Meanwhile, Police Scotland and the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service, COPFS, met with the Wilson family to discuss their concerns. And so, through all this bureaucracy, the investigation continues, with Police Scotland urging anyone with information to come forward. The Wilson family remains trapped in a limbo of unanswered questions. The blue envelope, the missing message, and the mysterious motive only serve to deepen the mystery surrounding Alastair Wilson's murder. Number 6. W.A. Nannup Doomsday Cult. The small town of Nannup, Western Australia, was a place where you'd least expect something unusual to happen. But in July 2007, a horror of the strangest sort would shatter that sense of small-town normalcy, an entire family vanishing without a trace. Chantel McDougall, her partner Simon Cadwell, their 5-year-old daughter Leela, and a close friend, Antonio Popic, were not an ordinary family. Living on the fringes of society, they were drawn together by a shared belief in an impending apocalypse. Simon was the charismatic leader of an obscure internet cult. His online followers hung on his every word. He preached of a world doomed to destruction, urging his followers to prepare for the end. On that fateful morning, their home in Nannup stood eerily quiet. Neighbors noticed that the once lively household was still. Days passed without any sign of the family. Then, a note surfaced. A strange message claiming they had gone to Brazil to join a spiritual community there. And yet, the story didn't add up. Their passports had never been used. Their bank accounts were untouched. So where had they really gone? As the investigation began, police uncovered unsettling details about the family's final days. Simon had been seen selling his car for a meager $1,500, while Chantel also sold hers the day before she was last seen. Even their beloved Dachshunds were hastily sold off, with the buyer recalling Chantel's anxious behavior and her insistence that the dogs be collected immediately. The house they left behind was clean, save for a half-eaten bowl of rice. Was this their last supper? The inquest into their disappearance led to more unnerving details. Witnesses described Simon as controlling. In fact, he was a man who had assumed a false identity, stealing the name of a former acquaintance from England. His real name was Gary Felton, a fact uncovered only after the family had vanished. Could this deception have driven them into hiding, or was it something darker? Then came more cryptic details. A bus ticket to Norcliffe was booked under the name J. Roberts from their Nannup home, but it was never used. Instead, train tickets under the same name were redeemed on July 16th, one bound for Kalgoorlie, the other for Norcliffe. Yet no one could confirm whether the passengers had reached their destinations. Police tracked Antonio's phone to Perth on July 15th, tracing calls to a backpackers hostel and a local gay bar. A Domino's delivery driver even remembered delivering pizza to Kings Park, identifying Antonio as the customer. But after July 16th, the trail went cold. An unfortunate natural disaster may have destroyed critical evidence months later. The odor of death was reported in the bushland near Norcliffe, where a woman's t-shirt was found. By the time it was investigated, bushfires had swept through, destroying any potential evidence. Years passed, and the case remained unsolved. Tasked with closing the inquest, Coroner Barry King stated there simply wasn't enough evidence to declare them dead. Were they living somewhere off the grid under new identities? Or had they met a more sinister end? Every cult has a doomsday. Maybe this was theirs. Number 5. Ryan Shutka. In the snow-covered mountains of Sun Peaks, British Columbia, a group of partygoers gathered inside a warm, dark house. The ski season had brought them all together. But as the clock neared 2 a.m., Ryan Shutka, a 20-year-old seasonal worker, stepped outside into the cold, and what happened next remains unknown. Ryan was a familiar face at the Sun Peaks Resort, known for his easygoing nature and genuine smile. He had quickly made friends among the seasonal workers, his days spent operating the ski lifts, and his nights filled with youthful camaraderie. But something was different that night. After leaving the warm house party, Ryan seemed to vanish into the cold darkness without a trace. The next morning, the party awoke to the unsettling news that Ryan had not made his way home. He was quickly reported missing, and a search began, with volunteers combing the snowy forests and rugged trails that surrounded the resort. The RCMP launched an investigation, but no clues emerged. As spring came and the snow began to melt, hope faded as he still hadn't been found. Local newspapers plastered Ryan's face on their front pages. Theories arose, speculation fueled by the silence of the RCMP, who offered little information to the public. Some believed Ryan had wandered off into the dense forest, lost in the treacherous terrain. Others speculated darker scenarios, abduction, or foul play. For Ryan's parents, Heather and Scott Shutka, the silence was unbearable. They had spent months searching to no avail. Heather refused to believe that her son had met a end. Ryan was a loyal friend, full of humor and life, not the kind to provoke or seek trouble. Jim Reed, a visitor staying near the house where Ryan had last been seen, recounted an unsettling memory from that night. He reported that he had heard an angry voice shouting, "Get in the car, get in the effing car." Reed reported the incident to the police, but after a few follow-up calls, nothing came of it, leaving him to wonder whether what he'd heard was connected to Ryan's disappearance at all. Retired RCMP investigator Brian Smith, who had volunteered to assist in the search, initially believed Ryan had succumbed to the harsh elements. But a tense conversation with one of Ryan's friends shifted his perspective. The friend seemed too afraid to speak openly. Smith's instincts told him that this was no ordinary missing person case. He suspected foul play, a conclusion he shared with the RCMP. Despite these suspicions, the RCMP continues to maintain that there is no evidence of criminal activity, and the case remains an open investigation. But for the residents of Sun Peaks, the lack of information feeds a sense of unease. Young seasonal workers now hesitate to walk home alone at night, as Ryan's unknown fate could be theirs. Number 4. Gunther Stoll. Something was a-brewin' in the mind of Gunther Stoll. He'd been growing increasingly agitated as of late, convinced that unseen forces were closing in on him. His wife had become accustomed to his bouts of paranoia, brushing them off as mere imaginings. But on that fateful evening of October 25th, 1984, something changed. A realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. "Jetzt geht mir ein Licht auf," he shouted. "Now I get it." In a rush, he grabbed a scrap of paper and scrawled 6 cryptic characters: YOGTZE. He stared at the letters, terrified clarity in his eyes, before hastily crossing them out. Without another word, he bolted from the house, leaving his wife bewildered. Where he went was someplace familiar, a small pub that he frequented nearby. It was just past 11 p.m. when he arrived. The bartender recognized Gunther immediately, but something about him was different that night. He ordered a beer, but didn't take a sip. His eyes were distant, his mind elsewhere. Then, without warning, he collapsed, his body crumpling to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. His face struck the cold tiles, and blood spilled from his mouth. But when he came to, he seemed more disoriented than truly injured. Without finishing his drink, he stumbled out into the night. The next 2 hours were a void in time that would never be fully explained. When Gunther reappeared, it was on the doorstep of an old childhood friend in the quiet town of Hagersielbach. His sudden arrival in the dead of night was as unsettling as his incoherent ramblings. Though worried, the woman refused to let him in. She instinctually felt something was off. Gunther spoke of a horrible incident that was to come. She urged him to go home to his parents' house nearby. With no other choice, Gunther departed, once again stepping into a void during which no one knows what he did. It was nearing 3 a.m. when 2 truck drivers were making their way along a desolate road and spotted a wrecked car by the roadside. They pulled over and found a chilling scene. Inside the mangled Volkswagen Golf was Gunther Stoll. He was slumped in the passenger seat, naked and barely clinging to life. Bloodied and beaten, he mumbled something about 4 strangers who had attacked him, beating him loose before abandoning him there. As the drivers tried to piece together what he was telling them, Gunther passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Even more alarming was the fact that the truck drivers reported that they had spotted a man in a white jacket fleeing the scene as they approached. But the figure was never found. The police determined that Gunther hadn't been injured in his own car. Instead, it seemed he had been hit by another vehicle, his body placed back in his Volkswagen before the staged crash. But why? And who were the 4 strangers he spoke of in his final moments? And what of YOGTZE, the cryptic note he'd written before fleeing home? Was it a premonition? A license plate number? Speculation ranged from drug deals gone wrong to bizarre theories involving yogurt flavoring and Romanian radio stations. Yet, after more than 3 decades, the case of Gunther Stoll remains as cryptic as YOGTZE. Number 3. Who put Bella in the Wych Elm? April of 1943 was a time when the world was at war, and Britain endured the horrors of nightly air raids and the scarcity brought by food rationing. But in the quiet woods of Hagley Estate in Worcestershire, something far more sinister was about to be discovered. 4 teenage boys, driven by hunger and mischief, decided to trespass on the estate. They had hoped to find birds' nests and maybe a few eggs to help supplement their meager rations. But what they found that day was something that would put them off food for a while. Bob Farmer was the first to climb the gnarled branches of an ancient elm tree. As he reached into a hollow, hoping to find an egg or 2, his fingers brushed against something cold, smooth, and unmistakably human. It was a skull, with a patch of rotting flesh still clinging to it, and strands of hair matted to the bone. The two crooked front teeth seemed to leer at him as he stared in horror. Panicked, the boys scrambled down the tree and fled. They knew they were trespassing, and the fear of punishment kept them silent. They made a pact, swearing never to speak of what they had found. But the youngest among them couldn't bear the weight of the secret and eventually confessed to his father, who contacted the authorities. When the police arrived, they found the skeletal remains of a woman hidden deep within the hollow of the tree. Little was left of her, just scraps of clothing, a fake gold ring, and the haunting evidence of a life snuffed out too soon. There were no clues to her identity, no name to give her, no story to explain her death. But soon, a message would appear that would turn this discovery into one of Britain's strangest mysteries. Scrawled in chalk on a wall in Birmingham, the words appeared: "Who put Bella down the wych elm?" The question sent shivers down everyone's spine and sparked wild speculation. Who was Bella, and why had she been hidden in such a tomb? The theories that followed were twisted. Some believed Bella was the victim of a ritualistic killing, a sacrifice in some dark, ancient rite. Others suggested she had been a spy whose mission had gone horribly wrong, and now she was silenced. Despite extensive investigations, Bella's identity was never confirmed. The war had drained resources, and the forensic methods of the time were crude at best. Her distinctive crooked teeth, her age, and possible evidence that she had given birth were all potential clues, but they led nowhere. Theories of espionage and witchcraft continued to be fueled by the eerie messages that continued to appear across the Midlands, as though someone was refusing to let her memory die. One author and historian, Keith Swallow, hasn't. Swallow has researched the case for years. He believes the graffiti was just a tasteless prank, and the body found belonged to a woman in a traveling community whose life ended in an act of domestic violence. If this is the case, it takes the wilder theories of espionage and witchcraft out of the legend of Bella in the wych elm, and it contextualizes her death in circumstances that are, unfortunately, all too common. Number 2. Dupont de Ligonnès family murder. The village of Montferrand-le-Château was usually a place of quiet reflection, its narrow streets lined with ancient stone buildings, where the nuns of the Sisters of Bethany devoted their days to prayer and contemplation. But one March evening, there was talk of a mysterious figure within the monastery's walls. A man calling himself Jean, with no clearer identity, had sprung onto the scene. Wandering the paths aimlessly, he had appeared and then vanished just as mysteriously 2 days later. Rumors spread quickly. 3 people believed they recognized this stranger. They claimed he bore an uncanny resemblance to Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, a man whose name had become synonymous with one of France's most chilling unsolved mysteries. 13 years earlier, Dupont de Ligonnès had disappeared without a trace after the brutal murders of his wife Agnes and their 4 children. Their bodies had been found buried under the terrace of the family home in Nantes, and since then, the family had been asking, "Where is Xavier?" Authorities descended on the monastery, acting quickly on the local reports. They searched the grounds for any sign that might confirm the identity of the elusive Jean, or better yet, lead them to him. They discovered a collection of discarded items, empty food and drink cans. These would be the forensic link that could either reignite the manhunt or snuff out speculation. The cans were sent off for analysis. The DNA was extracted and compared to the genetic profile of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. For days, the village held its breath. Could it really be him? Could the man who had evaded capture for so long have been hiding in plain sight? Finally, the results came in. The DNA did not match. The man known as Jean was not Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. The tension that had gripped the town of Montferrand-le-Château began to dissipate, but the story was far from over. The mystery of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès remained. Did he take his own life or escape to another country? His sister, Christine, wrote a book claiming that Xavier had been forced to flee to the United States, possibly as a CIA operative, a theory that seemed more fiction crafted in her brother's defense than fact. Yet, despite the failed lead, the search for Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès pressed on. To this day, his whereabouts are unknown. And as for the enigmatic Jean, the mystery of his identity and his transient nature also remains unsolved. Number 1. The Highway of Tears. Some have come to find that British Columbia's north-central interior and rugged terrain lend itself to a lurking evil. For decades, locals have spoken of a desolate stretch of road that had become known as the Highway of Tears, where the lives of many women, most of them indigenous, have been tragically cut short. Winding through thick forests and isolated communities, the Yellowhead Highway 16 bears the weight of unsolved disappearances and murders, a national crisis that has shattered countless families. It was on this very highway that 16-year-old Ramona Wilson was last seen. The year was 1994, and Ramona had set out to hitchhike to a friend's house in Smithers, a small town that bordered the highway. She never arrived. Time passed with no answers, and her family's hope began to wane. Endless search parties combed the woods and ditches, but it wasn't until April of the following year that Ramona's remains were discovered near the Smithers Airport, hidden under the underbrush. The pain of losing Ramona cut through the heart of her community, but sadly, her story was far from unique. Decades earlier, in the fall of 1969, 27-year-old mother of two, Gloria Moody, had been out for an evening in Williams Lake. She had visited a local bar. The next day, her body was found in a field far from home. Gloria's death marked the beginning of what would become a long and horrifying series of tragedies along the highway, each story a life lost or missing. In the years that followed, more women vanished. Among them was 14-year-old Isla Sarek Auger from Prince George. Isla was last seen by her family in early February 2006. 8 days later, her body was found in a ditch alongside the highway, just 15 kilometers east of Prince George. The discovery shone the spotlight on this endless road of the missing and murdered. Official estimates place the number of victims along the Highway of Tears at over 40. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the RCMP launched Project EPANA in 2005 to investigate these cases. The vast, remote landscapes of British Columbia are an obstacle in answering the many questions about the lives lost. The Highway of Tears is more than just a road. It's a symbol of a national crisis, the harsh realities faced by Indigenous women and girls across Canada. Though the voices of the victims have been silenced, the voices of those who remain have grown louder in demanding justice. And we can only hope that justice will one day be served.